30 years ago, the Bosnian genocide took place and the world looked on. And today, the Palestinian genocide is taking place and again, the world looks on. Is there a common link? Let's take a look. Many of the factors which allowed the Bosnian genocide to take place are also present today, allowing the Palestinian genocide to take place. So let me address a number of points to explain to you how and why this is the case. Firstly, international law isn't there to create justice and harmony between nations. Number two, democracy isn't there to enforce the will of the people. Number three, terrorism isn't about terrorism. And number four, freedom of speech is not about free speech. And when they say never again, it doesn't mean never again. And at the end of the video, I will make an important point that we need to take a note of. So firstly, let me address this never again slogan. Never again doesn't mean never again. So while the genocide has been taking place for almost 2 years, this hasn't stopped Western powers coming together and commemorating Holocaust Day and saying never again. Never again clearly doesn't apply to the Palestinians or the Kashmiris or the Uyghurs or the Rohingyas or many other people. Never again only applies to those people they say it applies to. Never again is a meaningless slogan because Western empires, European empires were built on massacre and genocide. The UK committed genocide against the Aborigines and took their land. They committed genocide against the Native Americans and took their land. They committed genocide against many African people in Southern Africa, in Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and took their land. And those that committed the genocide, not only were they never held to account or pay reparations for what they did, they had statues built in their memory and they are considered heroes. Their history is blood-soaked in genocide and massacre, and the present day is no different. They are continuing in that vein. Illegal wars, invasions, bombings, making people refugees, homeless, killing tens of thousands of people, and yet every year they still come out without any shame or embarrassment to say never again. Never again for who? Only for those people that they say it applies to. International law. This is a one-way street. It is not there to create harmony and justice amongst the nations of the world. International law and its institutions were created in order to protect the interests of a very small group of Western nations after the Second World War. In fact, it is international law and the international institutions which facilitated the massacre, the genocide in Bosnia. The United Nations passed the resolution putting an embargo on Bosnia, not allowing anybody to arm and help the Bosnian people, whilst the Serbs and Croats had recourse to a military, and so they massacred and slaughtered a largely defenseless people, and the international community did nothing. Secondly, they created a safe haven for the Muslims in Srebrenica. 8,000 men were killed by the Serbian forces. This was under the protection of the United Nations. But when the Serbian army came, the United Nations peacekeeping forces walked away and allowed 8,000 men to be massacred. So the international law and the international institution played a direct role in the massacre in Bosnia. Now we are witnessing a genocide in Palestine, which the people who are doing it are gloating over it. Their politicians and the occupation forces are gloating over this genocide. The international community is aiding and abetting them, giving them military supplies almost on a daily basis, giving them logistical help, giving them surveillance help, giving them intelligence help, giving them financial help, and even political cover to commit the genocide. And America even bombed Iran recently. They had no justification for doing that. Yet, not only is this not a talking point, nobody is holding America to account or taking her in front of a judge and jury to account for the crime that they committed. This clearly shows that international law is designed to work one way in order to protect the interest of a tiny group of Western powers. So if any Muslim mistakenly thinks that the United Nations or international law can be used to aid the Muslims, just remind them of history and the role that international law and its institutions have played. It is working as it was designed to work after the Second World War. International law was never designed to hold the Western powers to account. It was there to hold other people to account. And you can hear this from the horse's mouth. Keir Starmer, who used to be a human rights lawyer, He openly says that the war in Ukraine is a genocide. But yet he cannot say that about Palestine, even though it is a clear-cut case of genocide. Those doing it are saying it's a genocide. The politicians in that land are saying it's a genocide. Human rights organizations and various bodies around the world are saying genocide. But these Western leaders cannot say that.
I think it's unwise for politicians to stand on stages like this or to sit in television studios and pronounce day by day which acts may or may not be in accordance with international law. I think it's not the role of politicians. I don't think it's wise to do it.
With your lawyer's hat on, is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
Yes.
Yes.
What I've seen already amounts to war crimes, particularly the awful attacks on civilians. And I think it's very important that he's held to account and is responsible. And all those that are acting with him know that they too will be held to account. And this is something which we need to make clear now, so that those who are involved at the moment know what the consequences are.
Terrorism wasn't about terrorism, but it was there to facilitate the Western powers to further their agenda. The West's invasion and illegal war in Iraq and Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11. But America didn't let that event go to waste. They used it for their benefit to further their agenda and their plan for the Middle East, to reshape the Middle East. And this wasn't a secret. They documented this. The neocons who run the government at that time documented this in their report, which was entitled The Project for a New American Century. So the fear of terrorism was created to justify their illegal invasion and illegal wars. And it was there to demonize the Muslims and Islam, because Muslims and Islam posed a potential threat to the American hegemony in the Muslim world. So before it became a real threat, they wanted to nip it in the bud. So although the CVE legislation, countering violent extremism, was justified as trying to curtail radical extreme Islam, it was actually crafted to protect and defend their political agenda. So anybody who opposes that, this legislation will be used against that. Now we are seeing this legislation being used against a retired 83-year-old woman accused of terrorism who voiced her opposition to the genocide, against a member of Pink Floyd who himself is a pensioner, and many other artists have been deplatformed, demonized, and are being criminalized for showing their opposition to the genocide in Palestine. And this legislation is being used against animal rights activists who opposed Big Pharma. And this legislation is being used against anti-capitalist protesters who campaign against banks. So terrorism isn't about terrorism. It's about gaslighting anybody who opposes their agenda. And the biggest terrorists are these Western nations who have terrorized the world from colonial times to the present day. Freedom of speech is a one-way street. It is used by the West to mock and demonize Islam, to mock Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they hide behind freedom of speech. But when Muslims and others speak up against the West, against the powers, against their crimes and what they are doing in the world, suddenly you find legislation banning, proscribing, deplatforming people who hold an opinion contrary to what they want you to hold. The full might of the state and legislation is used to silence opposition. Laws have been passed to proscribe groups in Britain who oppose what the West is doing in Palestine. The BBC censors their news broadcasts, their reports, and even documentaries that they themselves have made. They censor their own output in order not to offend the people who are committing the genocide. And those who oppose the genocide, they are being criminalized. This is the dystopian reality we find ourselves in. We find the BBC is more pro-Zionist than the Zionist media in occupied Palestine, like the Haaretz newspaper. And when in Paris there was a murder because of what Charlie Hebdo did in their magazine, the world's leaders gathered in Paris and had a demonstration for free speech. Well, where is Charlie Hebdo today? Where are the leaders of the world today? Rather than supporting free speech, we see legislation, censorship, and criminalization of anybody who opposes the genocide. So freedom of speech is a one-way street. They can use it to insult and mock you, but when Muslims and others hold them to account, you find that you are being criminalized, silenced, and proscribed. Democracy is not about enforcing the will of the people. It doesn't matter who you vote for in a democratic election. The foreign policy and the main economic policies are determined by think tanks who are funded and set up by vested interest groups, whether they're the banks, the billionaires, the corporates, or whoever who holds the capital and has interest in that nation. So when they talk about British interest or American interest, these are the people that they are talking about. They're not talking about Joe Bloggs in the street. These are the people that define foreign policy and economic policy. So voting merely legitimizes and gives a moral justification for these capitalists behind the scenes with their think tanks to shape policy and to control the governments. So recently, when the leader of the United Union in Britain said that had he not known Labour was in power, he would not be able to work that out by the political program that they have embarked upon. And this is nothing new. Even when Tony Blair came to power, the illegal wars were done under his watch. The demonization of Islam and the introduction of so-called terror legislation was done under his watch. So in Western nations, democracy is used to legitimize the rule of the capitalists. In the Muslim world, it's not even allowed. Because if the vote is for Islam, it's not accepted. 1991, when there was elections in Algeria, the vast majority of people voted for FIS, for an Islamic government to rule Algeria. France and Europe rejected that, cancelled the election, and created chaos in Algeria, which lasted for many years after that. When in Palestine, the Palestinians in Gaza voted for Hamas to be their electoral representatives, the Western powers rejected that and did not recognize them to be the legitimate rulers of that land. So democracy, when it delivers a result not in favor of the Western nations, it is rejected. Democracy is a one-way street. It's not there to design to enforce the will of the people. It's there to be used to legitimize the rule of the capitalists. When Bosnia broke away from the former Yugoslavia, just like Serbia and Croatia, they wanted to create an independent state. This led to the Balkan Wars, and this led to the Bosnian genocide. The president of France, Francois Mitterrand, risked his life, flew to Sarajevo to meet with the head of the Bosnians, Ali Izetbegovic, in June 1992, and got an assurance from him that he was not going to create an Islamic state in Bosnia. So the will of the people doesn't matter. As far as the West is concerned, it's either their way or the highway. So we truly live in strange times. You know, in the past, we had novelists using their wild imagination to write about dystopian futures, about where the governments are out of control. So you had George Orwell writing 1984, and then you had George Orwell writing Animal Farm, and you had an American author, Ray Bradbury, writing Fahrenheit 451, talking about a dystopian future. The dystopian reality that we are living today far exceeds what their wild imaginations wrote in their novels. We live in a world where peaceful protesters are labelled as terrorists and criminalised. And those people committing the genocide, you are not allowed to speak against them in case you hurt their feelings. That's the dystopian reality that we are living in today. We live in a dystopian reality where the powerful nations in the world are supporting the Zionist colony to commit genocide against a defenseless people. And anybody who opposes that is labelled a terrorist and is criminalised, proscribed, or shut down. So the international institutions and laws are controlled by a small group of Western nations for their interests. Many Muslims have known this, but now the wider public is waking up to this dystopian reality that we are living in. And it's high time that Muslims shed this inferiority complex and think that the only way to achieve something is through the democratic process or through the international law and the international institutions. They were never set up to deliver Islam. To try and imagine that you can achieve Islam through these systems is like a gay person expecting to have a baby through a gay marriage. It's not going to happen. In the Prophet ﷺ, we have the most excellent example of working outside the system in an independent capacity to remove the evil and darkness and replace it with the light of Islam and the Khilafah system that Islam brought. The world order, which was designed to serve the interest of a few Western nations, is broken, and is broken beyond repair. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد والحمد لله رب العالمين.